Hey guys, welcome back. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is a pro-revenge story. When I was a little kid, my dad, Jack, was my best friend. He worked multiple jobs to support our family, all while powering his way through law school. He even built a couple of small tech startups from scratch with a few of his college buddies. Despite his busy schedule, he managed to be the best dad ever, spending as much time as he could with my mom, Sarah, myself, and my younger siblings. One day in 2015, we found out that he had stage 4 pancreatic cancer, the kind you don't recover from. Mom and I stayed by his side throughout his battle. The last memory I have of my father was when he was completely immobile, practically unresponsive with tubes going in and out of his body. I remember sitting by his bed, holding his hand, and praying that he'd still recognize me. "Dad, it's me, Alex," I whispered, fighting back tears. All he could do was smile weakly at me, letting me know he still recognized his son, even though the doctors had warned us most of his memories would be gone. Eventually, he fell into a coma for a few days before waking up briefly to say goodbye to Mom, who was by his side when he passed away. She had been a stay-at-home mom, so we didn't have much to fall back on after his death. Enter my grandfather, Robert. He was one of those self-centered boomer types who made everything about himself. After Dad died, he used the online obituary to boast about his son's grades and achievements, which I realized seemed to be the only thing Dad was to him. Just in case you were wondering, yes, we're Asian American. Mom was grieving and trying to find a way to make ends meet when Grandpa Robert graciously offered to help her manage Dad's 2 startups to support us. Mom agreed because she didn't have any business experience. "Sarah, let me take care of Jack's companies," he said with a patronizing smile. "You focus on the kids. I'll make sure you're all taken care of." As we grew up, the 2 startups didn't provide much for us, likely because Dad had been the driving force behind their success. Mom worked various part-time jobs just to keep us afloat. Grandpa Robert offered to help put me and my siblings through school. I managed to score some scholarships with good colleges, so thankfully he didn't have to do as much for me, but we were really grateful that he helped out with my siblings. After I graduated college in 2020, I discovered that my family was broke, and my 2 siblings were still making their way through medical school. My sister Emma even offered to drop out and get a job, but I encouraged her to keep going. "Emma, you're doing so well," I insisted. "You deserve to graduate and become the amazing doctor I know you'll be." My grandparents had cut us off because they didn't approve of the paths my siblings chose, especially Emma. For them, she was too female to have a career in medicine. My grandmother, Helen, was particularly vocal about it. "Why are you wasting your time and money becoming a doctor?" she'd say. "You're just gonna have children and quit." I was working as a high school history teacher in 2022 when I was contacted by one of Dad's old business partners, Mike, from one of his startups. After I asked him about how the company was doing, he dropped a bombshell. "Alex, I hate to tell you this, but your grandfather has been siphoning money from the company for himself," Mike explained. "He's been earning way more than he's been giving you and your siblings for your education." I was stunned. All our lives, he'd been making us feel indebted to him for money that was supposed to be ours to begin with. He had lied to us, claiming Dad's companies weren't making any money for us at all. We also realized that when he cut us off, he was cutting us off from our own money, forcing my siblings to consider dropping out and giving up careers they'd been working towards their whole lives. What's worse is that this was our father's money, and we knew he'd wanted it to help secure our futures even after he died. Here was his father, basically trampling on his legacy for his own enrichment. I even found out that he used his position to take possession of the company's office space and force them to set up shop in a smaller, cheaper office while renting the original space out under his own name to the company's competitors to make more money for himself. All while I had to work multiple tutoring gigs to help Mom and my siblings pay the bills. It was time for revenge. Grandpa Robert's biggest weakness had always been his pride. I suspected that he wanted us to think he was helping support us out of his own pocket because he wanted everyone to see him as some kind of hero when in reality he was financially strangling us. I recognized that regardless of what Grandpa Robert said, my siblings, Mom, and I were legally the owners of Dad's company shares. So after having a statement signed by the 3 of them, I approached all the board members except my grandfather and informed them that I was now the sole representative of my late dad's estate. Grandpa Robert had also made himself chairman of the board. According to the company records, he did no actual work for the company, so the position was just a title that allowed him to receive money. I convinced the board that since he was only chairman as a representative of my father's estate, that made me the rightful chairman. "I don't intend to keep the position permanently," I assured them. "I know I don't have the experience for it, but we need to set things right." Then I reached out to other members of my extended family about Grandpa Robert's unethical practices with the company's office space. He was eventually pressured by them into evicting the company's main competitor from their office. At the next board meeting in early 2023, I prepared for the moment I'd been waiting my entire life for. When Grandpa Robert entered the conference room to preside over the meeting as the chairman, he found his chair facing away from the table with all the board members already seated. Like a scene from a movie, I spun the chair around to reveal that I'd been the one sitting there the entire time. "Hello, Grandpa," I said calmly. "We need to talk." The look of shock on his face was priceless. I told him that the company and our family no longer needed him and that I'd be taking control over the representation of my father's estate. "Do you know that I'm the one who put him and his siblings through school?" He sputtered, his face turning red. I simply replied, "No, Dad did." The look of sheer embarrassment on his face was perfect. I'd never seen him look so defeated in my entire life. This kind of satisfaction could not have been achieved by simply reporting him to the authorities. I stepped down from the chairman position and took a job in the company's finance department as an analyst with a modest salary. But at least now, any profit sharing or dividends that the company released would go where Dad had intended. Finally, one of the first decisions I got to make as a board member before stepping down was to give Mom a permanent job that she deserved. "Mom, how would you like to be the new head of HR?" I asked her. "You've always been great with people, and I think Dad would have wanted you to have a role in his company." She accepted with tears in her eyes, finally feeling like she could contribute to our family's legacy. Grandpa Robert is now jobless. He spends all his time at home, and because he spent his life being selfish and self-centered, he has no friends. All he had going for him was being able to lord over other people and boast about his assets and achievements. Even Grandma Helen has had it with him, and the two don't even sleep in the same room anymore. As for me, I hope he lives the rest of his short life regretting that he didn't live with more compassion and humility. And I'll make sure that Dad's legacy continues to support our family just as he had always intended. The next one is an entitled people's story. I never thought I'd have to deal with a neighbor from hell, but boy was I wrong. It all started when Karen moved in next door about a year ago. At first, she seemed nice enough, always waving and smiling when we passed each other, but it didn't take long for her true colors to show. It began with small things. She'd accidentally mow a few feet into my lawn or let her dog do its business on my side of the property line. I tried to be neighborly and let it slide, figuring she was still getting used to the boundaries. Big mistake. One day, I came home from work to find Karen giving a tour of my backyard to a couple I'd never seen before. They were walking around, pointing at things, and Karen was going on and on about the spacious lot and room for expansion. I stormed over beyond confused. "Excuse me, what's going on here?" I demanded. Karen turned to me with this smug little smile. "Oh, hello! I was just showing the Johnsons here the property. They're very interested." I blinked in disbelief. "Interested in what exactly?" "Why, in buying it, of course," Karen chirped. "I told them all about how you're looking to sell." My jaw dropped. "I'm not selling anything. This is my property and I have no intention of moving." The couple looked mortified and quickly excused themselves. Karen, on the other hand, didn't seem fazed at all. "Don't be silly," she said with a patronizing laugh. "We both know this neighborhood is going upscale. You can't possibly afford to stay here much longer. I'm just helping speed things along." I was seeing red at this point. "Get off my property right now before I call the police," I growled. Karen huffed and stomped off, but I had a sinking feeling this wasn't over. Sure enough, over the next few weeks I kept catching Karen showing my property to potential buyers. She'd wait until I left for work, then bring people over to tour my yard. I even caught her peeking in my windows once. Each time I confronted her, she'd act like I was being unreasonable for not wanting to sell. "You're holding up progress," she'd screech. "This neighborhood deserves better than your run-down little house." I tried reasoning with her. I tried threatening her. Nothing worked. So I decided to get clever. I took a week off work but didn't tell Karen. I waited until I saw her leading another couple into my backyard, then I called the police to report trespassers. When the cops showed up, Karen tried to smooth talk her way out of it. She claimed there had been a misunderstanding and that I had given her permission to show the property. But I had video evidence from my security cameras showing her repeated trespassing. The look on Karen's face when the officer slapped the cuffs on her was priceless. She was screeching about how she'd sue me and how I'd regret this, but I knew I was in the right. Karen ended up getting charged with criminal trespass and attempted fraud for trying to sell property she didn't own. She got slapped with a hefty fine and 30 days in county jail. The icing on the cake? While she was locked up, her landlord found out what happened and evicted her for violating her lease. By the time she got out of jail, all her stuff was packed up and she was persona non grata in the neighborhood. I waved goodbye as the moving truck pulled away, beyond relieved to see the last of Smug Karen, and you can bet I did a little victory dance in my backyard, once she was gone for good. The whole ordeal was a headache, but it taught me an important lesson about standing up for myself and my property rights. No matter how pushy or entitled someone acts, you can't let them walk all over you. Sometimes you have to get creative to put them in their place. And man, does it feel good when justice is served. These days, the neighborhood is nice and quiet. My new neighbors are friendly but respectful of boundaries. And every now and then, when I'm relaxing in my yard, I chuckle, thinking about Karen's shocked face as she was hauled off in handcuffs. Frankly, it was worth all the hassle just for that memory alone. So let that be a lesson to any nosy, entitled neighbors out there. Mess with someone's property at your own risk. You never know when your smug attitude might land you behind bars. The next one is a petty revenge story. I used to live in a basement flat in Brighton, a city notorious for lots of young people who love to party. The flat directly above mine was rented, with the tenants changing often. One summer, 2 young men moved in and immediately had a very loud, very busy party. That's fine within reason, but this party was still going at 2 in the morning on a Sunday night, and we had to be up for work in the morning. My partner went upstairs, knocked on their door, and asked them to keep the noise down. They muttered something and slammed the door in his face. Needless to say, nothing changed. By 2:30 a.m., we had had enough and decided to take action. A weird feature of our building was that everyone's electric meters boards were in one utility room, with access via a locked door from the outside alley. What the people living above didn't know is that we also had access to that room via an internal door from our flat, so I slipped into the room and flipped the main power switch to their flat into the off position, killing their electricity supply instantly. The noise stopped and there was a lot of shouting from upstairs. They were in the dark, in silence, with no idea what had happened. A few minutes later, we heard the outside door of the utility room being unlocked and opened, and they located their meter board and turned their power back on. Soon afterwards, the thumping music started again. Again, I flipped their switch. After 3 rounds of this, they must have assumed that their music equipment was overloading their ring main, and they gave up and everyone left. Result: we were never bothered in this way again, and they moved out 6 months later. The next one is a malicious compliance story. I worked for a 24-hour news organization, so someone needs to be in the studio at all times. As a staff monkey, I had things like PTO and vacation time, which I usually didn't use too often, but we were allowed to carry over 5 unused days each year, as long as we used those days in the first quarter of the following year. However, the end of the year is in high demand for off time because most people needed to burn unused vacation time that couldn't carry over. Management, wisely, makes sure everyone knows the policies and schedules December well in advance so there aren't any last-minute converge issues around the holidays. Since I didn't use a lot of my PTO during the year, due to built-up comp time and OT, I generally used it the week between Christmas and New Year's and took about 10 days off around then. One particular year I had 6 days left, 1 extra day. But since I already took off the time between Christmas and New Year's already, there literally wasn't a day left for me to use as a day off, as no one was left to cover a shift if I were to take off. I went to the scheduler and management and asked for either a one-time exception to carry over the extra day, and I'd take it on January 2nd, extending off time by 1 day, no go, I didn't do it with the required notice, or pay me 1 day's wages for the unused time, also a hard no-go. Here's the MC. Since I had so much built-up PTO due to working holidays or comp time for OT work, I had a ton of other days banked. Combining my already booked holiday break with my 5 carryover days and the 10 new ones I got for the new year, plus some holidays that come in the early part of the year, I figured I was able to take enough time off that I would leave for my Christmas break on 12/24 and not return until the last week of February, nearly March. And since I did it with enough notice, they couldn't deny me. They now have to cover about 2 months of my shifts. The next day, I put my time off in the system and emailed the scheduler a note saying, "Have a great holiday, I will see you in March." The day following, I received a call from the VP of the department asking me what they need to do. I said, "Simple, let me carry over my extra day. I will use it on Jan. Second, you have almost a month to cover 1 shift and we're all good." I got the carryover day and used it. The next one is an entitled people's story. Years ago, my family liked a guest house in a town which lives off tourists. It was family-oriented, it was Nice's, close to my favorite ice cream, and a family-oriented restaurant we frequented, so yay! The owners were friendly at the beginning, but somehow each time a guest was leaving, there were fees for damaged property when no damages were visible. So some guests found other places because they knew they didn't damage the property. We stayed 3 or 4 times. Then the gooseberry problem occurred, and it was the last straw. Later, my whole family joked that we were naive idiots paying for imaginary damages when entitled owners demanded, and we were idiots, which was unfortunate. The last straw was when I was 12 or 13. There was another family, girl 15 and boy 10. I said hi, and the girl almost removed my head, because I was a kid and she an adult. She wouldn't interact with me even if I kissed her shoes. Besides, she was from the capital and I was a peasant. Her mom laughed so heartily at that, and exclaimed how well her daughter explained where that dirty peasant's place was. After that scene, my family never let me approach the whole family, not even to greet them in passing, which also made them furious, as they believed every peasant should greet them humbly. At the same time, kids were rude, and for once there was damaged property, including a broken window when both owners saw it. But they said nothing and never asked them for compensation. 2 days before the great confrontation, both owners told me to grab some gooseberries from a bush. I thanked them and explained I was allergic so much that I couldn't touch a leaf. Eating one means SB. Must call paramedics and pray they arrive quickly. Which is true, but with help of a doctor I can now touch gooseberry. Not eat. That part is tricky. But it's a huge improvement. So on the day of the confrontation, we returned from dinner and both owners were waiting. They started screaming and people popped out of their rooms to see what was going on. Every single bush of gooseberry was damaged. Broken branches, stomped and flattened berries, a very sorry sight. Both owners demanded recompensation from my family because they saw me minutes earlier breaking all the bushes. At this point, my mom and aunt protested because minutes earlier I was in the restaurant with the whole family and the owners of the restaurant could confirm it. Not true. The owners knew it was me. Boy and girl were there too, laughing and telling every person around how my family would pay an arm and a leg and we'd see. See, but what? Some back and forth and I did something I shouldn't do being a kid. I confronted the owners of the house. Especially, I asked Mr. Owner if he remembered how I had explained I was allergic. Before he answered, Mrs. Owner screamed at me why my lies should mean anything. I ignored her and continued asking Mr. Owner if he had to call paramedics when I flattened all the bushes. He looked at me strangely and asked why should he, so I explained that it was to avoid arrest for murdering me by the way of preventing me from accessing medical help. People around got quiet when a kid talked murder and also looked at me weariedly, so I marched to poor bushes, grabbed a leaf and marched back to owners. I just held it and an ugly red rash spread. Then I asked the owners if they want me to strip so they could see the same rash not present on my whole body, and please explain how I could have damaged bushes without getting it. Both owners babbled something. We had no idea it was so serious, some guest told them. But we had shown you rude kids damaging the bushes, why do you blame that kid who wasn't there? And we went to our room. My dad went quietly to the restaurant, told the owners all, and explained we couldn't stay. As we ordered meals there, he asked them to count everything and tell him how much we owed them. They told us to pay for next day as they already had ordered groceries for our meals, which was fair, but not for the rest of our stay, which was very generous of them. Dad returned to the guest house where we were packing. We went to the owners and asked for our bill for the whole 2 weeks we were to stay. And we asked other guests to wait to be witnesses just in case. Mr. Owner babbled, "There is no need." Mrs. Owner was angry. We even asked them and witnesses to check our room for damages. We left 30 minutes later and on our way home asked a doctor for help. He checked my arm, told me off very sternly and I was to avoid stuff I'm allergic to, plus take my regular meds, and we drove home. Every year we went to that guest house, we called the owners around March to ask if they had free rooms in July. Next year we didn't call them. So in May they called us and happily told us how they kept our regular room so we could arrive any day we want to. They offered 5% off. So we equally happily explained that after last year's bad attempt at extortion, we have found another guest house in Town X. There was some clucking and my mom ended the call. We never returned to that house. I have been to the same town several times because it is cute and with funny tourist attractions. Just keep avoiding that one guest house. Guess what? With all the witnesses we asked for, the owners didn't add fees for fake damages in that last bill. But they never said sorry for screaming and accusations. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We'll see you again tomorrow.